squalor. He was held for a total of 8 years. Despite the desolation he must have felt, he managed to pull off an amazing feat while being recorded on video for propaganda purposes. People noticed he was blinking awkwardly, but this was actually Morse code. It spelled out torture, to let the world know how he was being treated. Finally, he was able to return home at the end of the war and was given the Navy Cross for his heroism while in captivity. Number 14. James Foley. James Foley was an American journalist who, while covering the civil war in Syria in 2012, was abducted, held hostage, and was sold to IS militants. The news came through in 2014 that he had been murdered by the terrorist organization, but not before managing to smuggle a secret message out to his family. He asked another hostage who was due to be released to memorize the letter he wanted to write, and when that man managed to return to the free world, he dictated the words to Foley's mother. It was a wonderfully poignant memory of his life and all the people that were important to him, and showed the true character behind a man that had found himself in such an awful position. It just goes to show that however bleak things may seem, there's always room for optimism and hope. Number 13. California Teen. In January of 2020, a horrific attack took place in Capitola, California. A 14-year-old girl was kidnapped by 3 men and driven more than 40 miles out of the town. She was treated terribly and must have thought her life was about to come to an end. But in a moment of clarity, she managed to get a hold of her phone and send a message on Snapchat that said, "Somebody help me. I'm in a random man's car. I'm not in Santa Cruz. Where am I?" Because Snapchat logs the location and time of a message, her friends were able to call local police who were on the scene in minutes. The 3 men were arrested and charged with a litany of offenses, but luckily the girl was able to return home, all thanks to her quick thinking. Number 12. Rachel Chandler. Rachel Chandler and her husband Paul had set sail in a small yacht from the Seychelles en route to Tanzania. But less than 90 miles into their voyage, they were boarded by Somali pirates who took them back to land and kept them hostage for more than a year. The British government refused to pay the ransom, but after almost 13 months in captivity, their family arranged for a payment to be made, and they were released. At first, however, it may have been much longer before anyone realized they were missing, had it not been for a blog that Rachel Chandler frequently posted on. She and a friend had a secret code just in case things went wrong. When she failed to reply to a message, this was enough for everyone to realize that she was in danger, and the family back in Britain were able to contact the authorities. Sometimes the failure to send something can be just as powerful as actually passing a message on. Number 11. Leah Sharibu. In April of 2014, the world was shocked when news emerged of a kidnapping that had taken place in Chibok, Nigeria, in which 276 schoolgirls were taken by a terrorist group called Boko Haram. Over the following few years, around half of them were released, but the whereabouts of the rest remains unknown. You can imagine the trauma that they and their families have been going through ever since that day. But one of the girls managed to get a message through to her parents in 2018. Leah Sharibu passed a message to one of her friends, who she knew was about to be released, and it gave her family some reassurance that she was still alive. According to the message, she had tried to escape several times, but the group was unwilling to release her because she had refused to convert to Islam. 2 years later, no one knows where she is, but her family still hold on to hope that she'll one day be able to return. Number 10. The Lindt Cafe Siege. In December of 2014, lone gunmen stormed the Lindt Chocolate Cafe in Sydney, Australia, and held 18 people hostage during a 16-hour standoff. It finished when a gunshot was heard, so police stormed the building, and it resulted in the deaths of 2 of the hostages along with the gunman himself. While events were taking place, one of the hostages managed to secretly send 2 messages to her mother. She called a local radio station and said that the first she received from him said, "Mom, I'm in the Lindt Cafe in Sydney," and after replying to him to ask what was going on, he responded, "I'm okay, Mom, can't talk." That was the last she heard from him while the siege was going on. She was relieved to find out that once it was over, he was one of the lucky ones who managed to get out alive. Number 9. Karen Espandola. Karen Espandola, a 27-year-old resident of Mexico City, had been to a job interview in December of 2019 in the city center and hailed a cab to take her home. She realized as soon as the car started moving that there was something strange about the driver, and she sent a message to her parents over WhatsApp that said, "Mommy, this man looks very suspicious and gross." Her mother suggested she get out of the car and find a new cab to complete the journey, but by this point, it was too late. The driver had locked the doors and was in the process of kidnapping her in an ordeal that would last for 6 hours. Thanks to the message she sent, her parents were able to alert the authorities about what had happened, and they managed to track down the vehicle and release her from her captor. Just a few hours later, a video was released of police officers escorting her back to her home, where she was reunited with her parents and her 3 children. Had it not been for the message, they may have never known that she had gone missing in the first place. Number 8. Dr. Peter Magombe. Dr. Peter Magombe was the leader of the Zimbabwe Hospital Doctors Association and an important part of the local medical community. He had organized protests to argue for better salaries for government doctors and, in the process, had made a number of enemies. He received a message to his phone one day that threatened his life, but little did he know someone was about to try and make it true. Several days later, he managed to send a message through WhatsApp to his friends that said that 3 masked men had broken into his home and abducted him, but that was the last anyone would hear from the doctor. It's not too unusual for something like this to take place in Harare, Zimbabwe's capital city, especially to those who speak out against the government, and to this day, no one knows what happened to him. Number 7. Kayla Mueller. Kayla Mueller was working for a human rights organization in Aleppo, Syria in 2013, when she was kidnapped as she left one of the local hospitals. It transpired that she had been taken by Islamic State and was kept hostage for 2 years until proof was released that they had murdered her. Following this awful revelation, her family released a letter that she had managed to send them from captivity. She had written it in secret with supplies she gathered from her time in imprisonment and gave it to a fellow hostage who was released. In it, she begs her family to not try and negotiate for her freedom and to take any other options if they presented themselves. She also named some other women to ask advice from, possibly because they too had been held hostage there, and said that she had not been mistreated and had, in fact, put on weight. Before we move on, be sure to subscribe to Top 5s with notifications on. Number 6. ECU student. A student at the East Carolina University found herself in serious danger in November of 2019. And had it not been for a text message she was able to send to her friends, she might never have made it out of the ordeal alive. She had been lured by 2 men into a car at 5 Points Plaza, and they proceeded to try to assault her. She had her phone in her pocket, though, and was able to send a message to her friend to let them know what was happening. And they managed to catch up with the car, follow it, and confronted the 2 men when they pulled up outside a motel. They released the girl straight away. Once it was reported to police, traffic camera footage was used to track down and arrest the kidnappers. Number 5. Cheryl Treadway. In May of 2015, Cheryl Treadway from Avon Park, Florida, had thought her boyfriend was behaving strangely that morning. But it was when he pulled a knife on her that she realized she was in imminent danger. Her kids were all at school, and there was no one nearby that could hear her screams. And after he tied her up and confiscated her phone, she was running out of ideas how to call for help. She managed to convince him that they needed to go and pick the kids up, but said she couldn't go alone, so went with her in the car. The problem was, when they got back, they were now all stuck in the home with him, and she appealed to his better nature to allow her to order a pizza before the children got hungry. He said she could, and this is when she took her chance. She opened up the app on her phone to order food, and in the comments section she wrote, "Please help, get 911 to me, 911 hostage, help." It was all she could do, and she sat down in the hope that the message would get through. Luckily, it did. The staff at the Pizza Hut called the police, and the next sound on the front door was an officer. He managed to talk the boyfriend into dropping the knife and to release his family, before arresting him and taking him out of their lives forever. Number 4. The Dutch train siege. The Dutch train siege was one of the worst terrorist events to ever happen in the Netherlands, and the lessons learned from it changed the way the country's armed forces respond to such incidents. It began on the 23rd of May 1977 when a group of 9 armed Moroccan men pulled the emergency brake on a train that was traveling near the village of Glimmen. They took 50 passengers hostage to highlight how their people had been mistreated by the Dutch government after fighting for them, but things wouldn't go exactly to plan. The siege lasted for 20 days, during which the attackers had set an ultimatum whereby they threatened to blow up the train and a local school that had also been taken over. Thanks to electronic surveillance that had been positioned on the train, authorities knew this was a hollow threat, so let the deadlines pass and did the same thing when another ultimatum was made. Still, those in charge were struggling to find a solution of how to end the crisis, which was about to enter its 3rd week. A breakthrough came when one of the hostages on the train was able to use a mirror to transmit a message by Morse code to ask for help, and because of this, it was decided that the siege needed to be ended straight away. 482 hours after the emergency cord was pulled, 6 fighter jets flew overhead, which caused the hostages to drop to the floor and distracted the hijackers before troops fired at the targets. More than 15,000 bullets were shot at specific parts of the train, which killed 6 of the attackers and 1 of the hostages. Had it not been for the secret message, who knows how much longer it would have gone for, and what else might have happened. Number 3. John Pryor. Sub-Lieutenant John Pryor was a British naval officer who was involved in helping evacuate troops from the beaches of Dunkirk in 1940. But while doing this, he was captured by the Nazis and held in a prisoner of war camp for the next 5 years. Because of his good behavior during that time, they allowed him certain privileges not afforded to most inmates, and one of these was the ability to send letters back home. Never the one to miss an opportunity, Pryor used these messages to send information back to the British military, and it even helped them decode some of the Nazi communications. On the face of it, his letters weren't secretive at all and seemed to be talking about gardens and methods for growing vegetables. But he managed to hide a highly complex alphanumeric code within everything that he had wrote, which is how he passed on information that he had heard within the camp. One letter, for example, detailed an attack on a British submarine, and another spoke of troop movements in the region. Despite being checked before being passed on, the prison guards had no clue that these letters were helping with the war effort. And it gave Pryor some reassurance that even though he wasn't able to fight on the front line as he wanted, he was still able to play his part from where he was being held. He was released at the end of the war, and in testament to how clever his codes were, even he was unable to decipher them when he looked back over them in 1980 to write his memoir. Number 2. Message sent to Colombian hostages. Quite often, hostages find themselves trying to get messages to the outside world, but in 2010, things happened a little differently. Colombia had found itself in the midst of a hostage crisis, and a large number of soldiers had been taken captive by FARC, which stands for the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. In some cases, they had been kept in prison for as long as 10 years, and while footage was periodically released as proof of life, it had become clear that they weren't being kept in the most hygienic of environments, and their ordeal was beginning to take its toll. It was a well-known fact that on the first sign of trouble, FARC troops would execute all of their prisoners, so the Colombian military needed to find a way to tell their men to be prepared. But how could they send a message without the captors hearing it too? This is where things got quite ingenious, because they knew the prisoners weren't allowed to read any newspapers or watch the news, but they were allowed to listen to music on the radio. The plan was simple. They made a message in Morse code that would tell the troops what to do, and then use this Morse code as the central rhythm to a pop song that would then be played across the airwaves. As radical as the plan might sound, it was a resounding success. The song, called Better Days, was played across 130 small radio stations in the jungle and heard by 3 million people, and gave hundreds of hostages the warning to be ready when the soldiers approached to free them. Number 1. Princess Shamsa Al Maktoum. Princess Shamsa Al Maktoum is one of the daughters of Sheikh Mohammed Al Maktoum, who was the ruler of Dubai. He's an influential figure in world politics, but some of his practices towards his children have been highly criticized, and he's long been thought to be responsible for the kidnap of his daughter more than 20 years ago. She was taken from the streets of Cambridge, and the police were at a loss as to what had happened to her. They apparently received a message from her in 2017, 17 years after her abduction, asking for help to escape from Dubai, but no one acted upon it. The story of the message was only revealed in early 2020, and the police force is now under investigation about why it wasn't followed up. They could have overlooked a crucial piece of evidence that might lead to the rescue of someone who's been held captive for most of her life. And if so, it raises questions about how much influence leaders of foreign countries should have in domestic affairs.
And he said, okay,
Subscribe to Top 5s for more and check out some of our other popular videos.